Agent Morris with the NSA.
There is something real here.
Did you believe that our government is in possession of UAPs?
Absolutely, based on interviewing over 40 witnesses over 4 years.
And where?
I know the exact locations, and those locations were provided to the Inspector General and some of which to the intelligence committees. I actually had people with the first-hand knowledge provide a protected disclosure to the Inspector General. Biologics came to some of these recoveries.
Those could represent exquisite new adversary technology.
Non-human, and that was the assessment of people with direct knowledge on the program I talked to that are currently still on the program.
The government is covering up some level of its knowledge and understanding about what some of those things are.
The Soul Foundation, which just announced a new initiative for UFO research and policy.
It's nuts, man. I mean, we're just small-town buds who saw a UFO in the woods. I mean, now we're hanging out with the government.
Wow. What floor were you guys on?
Hello and welcome, everybody. This is Smiles Lewis, and you are tuned in to another live edition of Anomaly-NOW, straight out of Austin, Texas. This is the weekly news and media roundup for the 501c3 nonprofit community group Anomaly Archives, aka Scientific Anomaly Institute, headquartered here in Austin, Texas. It's Wednesday again. It is April 2nd, 2025. I didn't do a show last week, of course, because we were hosting a wonderful Anomaly Academy lecture by our good friend Micah Hanks, talking about cryptozoology as revealed through official documents and files of various forms and other relict hominoids. You can find out more about that by going to anomalyarchives.org or visiting our patreon.com/anomalyarchives page. And we're going to dive right into some quick big news that's been making the rounds. Of course, you can go to our Flipboard over at flipboard.com/@anomalyarchives/ a bunch of other stuff, but there'll be a link there that'll take you there. And let's show you. This is what it usually looks like, and there's often just a ton of news, as there is this week. 2 weeks worth. Some great events coming up. There was a great event just today that I got to see, which featured Dr. Diana Pasulka talking about what else? UFOs, UAP encounters, people who've had encounters. Just added this to the Flipboard, an Eventbrite.com notification about dream archetypes featuring Dr. Stanley Krippner. He is an old hat at these amazing fields of inquiry known as anthropology, shamanism, and dream work. There's this video interview with Gary Nolan, aliens, the case, they're already here. This, I have not watched the whole, I just started, it's a 3-hour interview, so it's one of those big ones. The reason that came to my attention, it was just posted a couple of days ago, but another show on YouTube that I watch a lot, Psychoactivo, that often gives me leads on stuff that I haven't had the chance to watch yet or hadn't come across yet. In this interview, and I think it shows right at the beginning a clip of it, Gary Nolan talks about how he describes his life having been threatened because of his having said something in a roundabout way publicly about a secret government program involving apparently some kind of UFO related stuff, and a friend calling him and saying so-and-so at the White House is angry because of your having mentioned this publicly, and the friend saying that, there is the danger and threat of death, murder. Make of that what you will. I don't know that he goes into any more details in the interview, but in those 3 hours, he probably covers a lot of ground. There's 2 new audio podcasts that I have not had the chance to listen to, but I'm very interested in, from Recluse. You are probably familiar with his long, associatively meandering stream of consciousness connections style approach, something I am no stranger to. But this one's in 2 parts, called The Secret History of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Porn, Cults, and Trauma. And he's got my old acquaintance J.G. Michael. I think that's somebody I met over at the old Rigorous Intuition forums years ago. Anyway, I'm very curious to hear where that discussion leads, because it does connect a lot to Austin tech and other environs here in the crazy state of Texas. Good old Tanner Boyle has another dispatch on Jacques Vallée's Forbidden Science journals. It's dispatch number 9. I can't recommend enough Getting Spooked, Tanner Boyle's blog over at Substack. And if you prefer listening to articles as opposed to reading them, I can recommend that he has recorded 2 different podcasts where he reads the previous 8 Forbidden Science dispatches, where he basically, the articles where he's reviewed Jacques' Forbidden Science journals, he reads those out loud. And I've had been needing to catch up, and it was a good way for me to catch up with his writing. There's several of them that just are filled with interesting and amazingly strange and parapolitically connected information, as all of Jacques' Forbidden Science journal volumes are. Meanwhile, the other podcast I mentioned a lot, Patterns Tell Stories, one of their hosts, Garrett, has put out a new blog called Mind Viruses and UFOs. Again, haven't had the chance to read through that, but I recommended his other most recent article, Nazi Connections to the Murder Assassination of JFK, on one of our previous shows. So you might want to go check that out. We'll get to some of that other stuff. Yes. Yes, we're going to talk about the assassination transparency hearing that was aired yesterday, and also what's under the pyramids. Meanwhile, over at the Associated Press, there's an article, A Stroke Survivor Speaks Again with the Help of an Experimental Brain-Computer Implant. This is wild stuff. This implant can apparently, in a matter of seconds, or I think they're saying in real time, read brain signals and do thought to speech. This obviously has amazing potential for people with certain types of brain trauma, physical disabilities, and is terrifying in its implications for the rest of us. At the same time, I am fascinated this kind of implant technology. And of course, eventually it will just be some kind of brain scanning technology. It won't even need an implant, I'm sure, down the line. But fascinating areas of stuff. This other one from EurekaAlert.org, Fish Use Tools 2. I thought this might have been April Fool's Day hoax, but scientists have apparently researched fish ability to crack open mollusks in order to get to the meat inside. Yeah, very strange. Meanwhile, there's another lecture coming up by TrueVisionOfPeace.com that looks interesting too. It has to do with one of the guys that's continuing the work of Wilhelm Reich and one of his devotees who passed away in the last year or two. It's time to attend FESIG's meeting, FESIG's meeting. It looks like there's a variety of speakers. Tom DeFerdinando. Yes, he's the president of the Oregon Biophysical Research Lab. Back to the old Flipboard. You've probably heard the news. A UFO whistleblower, David Grush, is going to be working for Congress for the UAP oriented groups. There's also this Isaac Coy project where he is trying to continue his work feeding lots of UFO research data into these recursive self-improving AI creation tools so that they can be used for researching UFOs, UAP. I think that's a pretty exciting situation, even as it is obviously fraught with all the problems that we know exist with regard to large language models and, in fact, recursive self-improving AI. I think these are some of the ones that, as a online friend Stephanie Quick was pointing out, have led in previous instances to racist AI. So let's hope that Isaac Coy does better. Meanwhile, over at liberationtimes.com, Christopher Sharp was reporting on Immaculate Constellation, that alleged secret document that was entered into the congressional record by both Michael Schellenberger and Jeremy Corbell. with Michael Schellenberger getting most of the credit and that pissing off Jeremy Corbell no end. There's also this interesting research paper, world's first passive radar signal confirms visual UFO sighting. There's a paper published over at a German website, or I can't even begin to pronounce that. Meanwhile, John Greenwald Jr. over at theblackvault.com has created a search tool for the 60 to 80,000 page JFK document dump that has been the talk of much news articles. There's some other very interesting articles over at the Flipboard. Why did early humans take children into deep, dark cave networks? Well, I'm sure all you QAnoners think that it's for some terrible, terrible child sacrifices. I'm sorry, that's nothing to laugh at. No, the scientists here are suggesting that these ancient people believed that children were closer to the other realm and had an ease with communicating with the dead and the ancestors. How they would know that, I'm not sure, but maybe it's covered in this research paper. But it just has to do with all the evidence that shows that children were in fact taken down into these very deep cave ritual chambers where you can see their handprints, footprints, and other markings that they believe are associated with the children being involved in the rituals. Meanwhile, over at Anomalous.com, they have republished an updated version of an old paper that was put out, I think, 25 years ago called The Language of Space by T. Peter Park. And we've got links to websites talking about that. Yes, the Diana Pasulka presentation that I went to this morning was from her fairly newish Substack. You can find that over at dwpasulka.substack.com. And this was the presentation she gave this morning, this afternoon, American Cosmic UFOs, Religion, and Technology, a conversation with religious studies scholar Diana Walsh Pasulka. Hopefully that will be made publicly available, and you'll be able to see that soon, I hope. All right. Well, there's probably some other stuff I'm forgetting, but we're going to jump right in. Oh, you will find this article over at the Telegraph, The Astonishing Power of How We Perceive Time. Interesting. Also, in the creepy science category, ethically sourced, spare human bodies could revolutionize medicine. Yes, I'm sure they could. Oh, and inspiration or coincidence, Billy Cox over at his Substack does a review of a book that we talked about actually before. I think the review previously that we talked about was by Dr. Greg Agigian. And yes, this one, a UFO cinephile examines the source material. This is talking about the book by this fellow whose name I can never remember, Paul Meehan, who analyzed all these different sci-fi films and tried to see about this supposed correlation that several skeptical researchers have over the years suggested that implies that UFO reports and encounter narratives are basically just cultural influences from pre-existing UFO and science fiction literature, and particularly movies, popular culture. But in fact, I'm trying to think of what. Yes, the prescience hypothesis is what apparently he puts forth. The article briefly says, a lifelong sci-fi cinephile, Paul Meehan, has subjected himself to roughly 350 flicks involving UFO or extraterrestrial themes, going back to 1898 with George Méliès's Silent Man on the Moon short, The Astronomer's Dream. He jokes about being permanently scarred from investing so much of his life in so much mediocrity. However, in that foggy gray zone between correlation and causation, the author of 1998's Saucer Movies, a ufological history of the cinema, is tracking big screen plot lines that foreshadow actual events. Yeah, I really enjoyed this article as a nice accoutrement to previously mentioned and previously reported on Greg Agigian's review of this work. But okay, well, there is, again, a ton of news. Yes, here it is. Is there an ancient city hidden a kilometer beneath the pyramids of Egypt? That's the one. And this is, in fact, I think the article that I left off of the things I meant to have open. Yes, I'm so glad I remembered this. Okay, well, let's just dive right in. So, well, actually, before we begin, I did want to mention that, we talked about how we had a great time last week with Micah Hanks presenting on relic hominoids. Well, coming up at the end of this month on April 26th is going to be Michael M. Hughes giving a presentation, The Truth About Witchcraft. Michael Hughes, you might recall, gave a great introduction to Tarot for our 2020 Streamathon fundraiser. I've been tracking his writing and efforts for many, many years. I believe I found him through a certain forum many, many years back that I won't mention, but you can go to the website and find more about that upcoming event, or it'll soon be posted about on our Patreon. So if you're interested in the truth about witchcraft, I highly recommend that you join our Patreon at the $10 a month or higher level. So yes, the big news was this alleged discovery of an ancient city or some kind of massive structure under the pyramids. Now, this is the actual paper published at mdpi.com. Synthetic aperture radar Doppler tomography reveals details of undiscovered high-resolution internal structure of the Great Pyramid of Giza. Now, this doesn't seem to mention what's underneath it, but it's by two of the people that are making the claim about this underneath structure, Filippo Biondi and Corrado Malanga. Now, this version of the story is not as exotic as what you've undoubtedly come across in that's gotten all the attention. Now, this is a very interesting approach. This is a lot of the new archaeology efforts involve using various types of sensors to perceive through vegetation or underground or through existing structures. Excuse me. And this paper goes into the details about their methodology. Look at all those formulas. That doesn't look like a lot of fun. And then you get some images that give you a sense of the kind of spectrum imagery, the tomography that they're getting from this data, from these sensors. And then you start to see some of their computer recreations of this, which, I believe they're, I may be misrepresenting this, but I believe that they're saying they've found some new chambers inside the pyramid. Now, as far as I understand, like the picture that they're showing here, there's these kind of multi-level conical tower-like structures inside, and you can see their imagery for some of that. That's all been known, though maybe they have found some additional ones, but this paper does not go into the really wild, over-the-top stuff that really caught my breath in much the same way it's caught so many other people's breath, because it has to do with some massive, massive structure underneath these massive structures that are on the surface of the earth. But you'll see there's none of those fantastic pictures here. Well, let's go look at some fantastic pictures. This Substack blog, Occultum, Egypt discovery 2 kilometers below Khafre Pyramid shows transformer-like electrical columns. Synthetic aperture radar Doppler tomography reveals details of undiscovered high-resolution internal structure of the Great Pyramids of Giza. Now, there's this other book that's been published along with this paper that I believe is available on Amazon. Of course, I have not consumed this, but this has those same two researchers, Filippo Biondi and Corrado Malanga, reporting on, again, here's what we've already seen, these internal structures of the pyramids. Well, that's all very interesting. But then we get to this craziness. Supposedly, they're detecting what they've described as massive, tall, deep cylinders underneath the pyramid that seem to have some kind of spiral wrapped structure around them. And then even deeper below that, 2 massive blocks of some kind of structure, even deeper than that. This seems impossible. Not just, and then these are the more exotic images that are circulating in various forms. Again, it's very unclear, but then you get to the what we have seen in the paper is this kind of imagery, and one has to wonder how they are going from that to that, and that's where I just immediately am like, okay, come on, this is just ridiculous. So there is a YouTube channel where they did some press conferences. I think it's like 3 or 4 hours of material, and it's all in Italian. This is the video I think that turned me on to this, from Project Unity. Many of you are probably already familiar with this fellow's channel. He, of course, goes absolutely ape excrement crazy over this. And it's what led me down this rabbit hole and back to this page, strangely enough. So, okay, now, not sure what to make of this. Meanwhile, there's this other Twitter X poster, Corey Wilkin, who I believe is the creator of this representation, trying to give an accurate, scaled, to show the depth of these structures. I have not tried to process this, but this person is claiming that what you see here on the left, these structures are so deep that they are to scale like 4 to 12 times the height of the pyramid down, unless he thinks he may be misinterpreted. And then he was like, well, maybe it's 2 kilometers of labyrinths around it underneath the surface. Either way, this is another extrapolation that I'm like, this is just insanity. Of course, there's been a lot of speculation for many years about mystical aspects or ancient technological aspects to the pyramids. There's a whole raft of ideas that have to do with the idea that pyramids are some kind of big device, some kind of power transformer. Of course, I know this is going to turn off a lot of people, but Snopes says, of course, no credible evidence supports claims of vast underground structures found beneath Egyptian pyramids. They say that this is false. They say this is not a peer-reviewed paper. They do also point out what I noticed, which is that this got totally grabbed upon by some of the least reputable resources out there, including Greg Reese of the Reese Report, who comes across as somewhat hinged, but who is former and probably still reporter, journalist, writer, producer, I think. I'm not sure exactly. For, guess what? Alex Jones. So sure enough, the Project Unity guy ended up on Alex's show talking about this, and it just gets wilder and wilder from there. It also appears that these researchers have, at the very least, used AI image generators to try to visualize the data that they've been working with. And that one has to start wondering, how likely is this? Perhaps, again, the best analysis I've seen so far is by Greg Taylor over at his dailygrail.com. Is there an ancient city hidden a kilometer beneath the pyramids of Egypt? And he goes into the evidence and information as best he can, given the language barrier and whatnot. I think he links here. This is the thumbnail for the big press conference that was held in Italy in Italian, dealing with these revelations. I believe all of those are still available on their YouTube channel. Meanwhile, I did link to this gentleman's YouTube channel, he speaks fluent Italian and analyzes the entire, yes, here we go. I watched the 4 hours conference of the pyramids of Giza in Italian. It's wild. So this guy, I'm not really familiar with him, but that may be a decent analysis of it. Hard to say. So the other big fun news, of course, has been the revelations coming out of the JFK file dump. Rep. Anna Paulina Luna is the head of this effort, this transparency and government task force, which only has, 6 months to try to get to the bottom of the JFK assassination, the RFK assassination, the MLK assassination, to get to the bottom of COVID, get to the bottom of the Epstein list, to get to the bottom of 9/11. Oh, and by the way, UFOs and UAP. Good luck. I will say this was a very fun and silly and hilariously entertaining 2-hour press conference or hearing or oversight and government reform task force on the declassification of federal secrets. Bipartisan, but boy, was it partisan. Some of the highlights that you'll find if you spend the 2 hours, the Republicans in the group in the hearing mostly seem to not have done their research, not known the details of what they were asking about. One of the reps misidentified Oliver Stone, the filmmaker, she was confusing him with Roger Stone. Poor Oliver Stone was having a hard time hearing and interpreting some of the questions that were coming to him, but he did a pretty good job of expressing himself. The two JFK assassination researcher experts were very good. That would be Morley and D'Eugenio. But again, the Republican representatives who were asking questions didn't know who they were talking. Like, they would ask one person a question, and that person would be like, I don't really know. You should ask him. He's the expert on that. And then the other back the other way. So at one point, one of the, I think, Republican reps accidentally, Freudian slip, described Oswald Stone instead of Oliver Stone. That was a little humorous. But I do feel like as much of that negative aspect occurred, the two JFK experts did a very good job of keeping on track. They knew what they were talking about. You could tell when they didn't, and they said so, but when they knew the answers to questions and they tried to make their points, I thought they did a really good job. There was a fourth person guest panelist, and he seemed to be a representative from some kind of Federal Department of Privacy and Digital Information Protection or something like that. And he was obviously there to kind of point out the problematic issues that have resulted because of the fast tracking of the declassification of these documents, how Social Security numbers of certain people living and dead were not redacted, and the problems that's caused for those people. Depending upon your perspective, and I'm not trying to get political here, but most of the Democrats in the hearing who interacted with the panelists just used it as an opportunity to score points on a political partisan basis. I would say by drawing good analogies between the kind of lunacy of the nature of this very hearing in the wake of, say, the recent Signal chat scandal in terms of national security issues and other political partisan point scoring, to the point where the two JFK experts, who were self-admittedly liberal-leaning themselves personally, expressed great frustration at this politicization of this opportunity to get this information out. I'm sure people have opinions on both sides of the spectrum. I can see it both ways. Again, I found it rather entertaining, even as I thought, gosh, they're wasting time trying to score political points against the current administration, even as I might personally find that very enjoyable. Yeah. Moving right along. Anyway, it's a fun 2 hours. Check it out. So something else that's you might have seen and that would seem right in with all the wild, anomalous information dumps, but you'd be wrong if you thought it was something new. The independent.co.uk headline, CIA found the Ark of the Covenant by using psychics, declassified files claim. Remote viewer number 32 allegedly uncovered the gold-plated chest believed to house the 10 Commandments. Now, as one might suspect, yes, this sensationalism is just, I think, again, using the recent mass declassifications as an opportunity to revisit clickbaity information. This is a real situation where, yes, something akin to the Ark of the Covenant appears to have been described by a remote viewer during a previously classified DIA psychic remote viewing program back in the 80s. In a remote viewing session on 5 December 1988, remote viewer 32 was tasked with identifying the coveted Ark, according to CIA documents recently circulating on social media. Yes, recirculating. The documents were first declassified in August of 2000. So these are 25-year-old documents as far as their declassification. They allegedly did not know the object they were being tasked to find. This has got some of the drawings. It's interesting. I mean, whatever you think of psychic remote viewing. Of course, this did remind me of back in 2012, we had Nick Redfern talk for our Anomaly Archives audience here in Austin, you can watch this video online. Nick Redfern at the Austin Center for Spiritual Living, September 29, 2012. The Pyramids and the Pentagon. That was, I believe, the title of the book that he wrote that was the subject of this lecture that he gave. And while it focuses more on just interesting FOIA obtained information as well as stories outside of those FOIA documents that have been circulating for years about the pyramids, he does at some point talk about the idea that some anomalous artifacts may have been recovered on Mount Ararat. And that's where we get to this other idea of the old idea of the CIA's covert hunt for Noah's Ark. Sparks new questions amid claims biblical boat has been found. Now, this is, again, a recent article, but this stuff's been circulating for a long time. This article over at dailymail.co.uk starts, after scientists recently claimed to locate Noah's Ark, an unearthed CIA document reveals that the agency knew where the biblical ship has been for over 50 years. Again, this is not new. This is just rehashing of interesting information nonetheless. The CIA file, declassified in 2002, appears to reveal that the U.S. intelligence community has had their eyes on this exact spot since 1957. The agency investigated Mount Ararat from 1974 to 1982 using images from satellites and spy planes after the Director of Central Intelligence, DCI, requested any evidence of the Ark sitting at the site. And so there's this structure that has long caught people's attention because it looks kind of boat-like, and in satellite images and, again, spy plane images, it is thought that at the very least it might be some kind of interesting ancient human structure, or maybe just an interesting natural formation. Hard to say. But of course, our good friend Micah Hanks has been reporting on this both in his subscriber-only X podcast as well as the publicly available Micah Hanks program podcast. You can find links to those over at his website, micahhanks.com. It's the March 30th X podcast where he goes into much greater detail and re-airs some old wonderful interview audio with our good friend Paul H. Smith, the former military remote viewer who, along with the help of others, wrote the military's manual for how to do psychic remote viewing. And Micah touches a little bit on that in the publicly available March 31st episode that dropped a couple of days ago. Anyway, it was Micah that also reminded me of these links to theblackvault.com, where they have some of these documents dating back to 2014 is when he got this response regarding any documents pertaining to Noah's Ark. And you can go to the link that will be in the show notes for this show and find that document and read it for yourself. You can also go to the CIA's reading room, cia.gov, and read this brief 4-pager that is likely related to what that Daily Mail article was talking about. And I just happened to have come across in the last few days our acquaintance here in Austin, Edward Reardon. Edward Reardon is a psychic remote viewer who was at one point helping lead local psychic remote viewing training classes and an exploration group that was put on by one of the nonprofits that I used to be a board member of, INACS, the Institute for Neuroscience and Consciousness Studies. And it appears that our good friend Paul Smith was back in Austin. And so Edward had him in person to do an interview. And of course, he had to bring all this up. Well, so apparently Paul Smith was one of the psychic remote viewers. I don't know if he was number 32, but he was one of 2, at least, remote viewers that was tasked with this. So he was a part of this very story. So that's pretty cool and interesting. I've, of course, interviewed Paul a number of times. He also did a presentation for our Streamathon 2020. And the last time I saw him in person was at the Rice University event in Houston for the opening of the Archives of the Impossible in 2022, which brings me to our last story of the night, the Archives of the Impossible 2025, UFOs and the Impossible, which starts tomorrow, folks. I believe I don't know if the in-person tickets are still available, but they probably still have the online virtual tickets available. That's how I'll be watching for the next 3 days, starting tomorrow, Thursday, April 3rd. And if you go to the impossiblearchives.rice.edu/UFO-and-impossible, you will find this information about the schedule, how to get tickets, and that sort of thing. So yeah, starting at 4 o'clock tomorrow, they'll be doing introductions featuring Diana Walsh-Pasulka. Gary Nolan will be giving a lecture. Retired Rear Admiral Timothy Galladay will be giving a presentation. And then Friday, it's a full lineup starting at 9:30 in the morning with Carl Nell, Wes Waters, Kevin Knuth, Karen Austin, who's the project manager for the Archives of the Impossible, formerly having worked with the John Mack collection. Kimberly Ingalls is new to me, but she's also presenting. She's an associate professor of philosophy at Molloy University, and a lot of other presenters that I think should be interesting. Can't wait to see all this. So, and then there's more going on that Friday and then also Saturday. Wow. Okay. Well, that is going to be it for tonight, folks. Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate you tuning in or listening to the rebroadcast, audio only or the audio video version. It's all there for you. And have a good night, folks.